Hey folks, Steve here with another Nations in Arms video for you. Today we are going to be looking at a scenario set during the War of the Second Coalition, this being the 1799 Suvorov's last campaign scenario. So let's set the stage a little bit because we played all the way through the War of the First Coalition scenario, which was the scenario that covered the entirety of the War of the First Coalition ultimately. This scenario picks up 2 years later after the end of the War of the First Coalition in 1799 and is a little bit different. So, unfortunately, as opposed to the War of the First Coalition, the War of the Second Coalition is broken up into two scenarios, more or less, in this game in Nations in Arms. It's not one whole scenario for the War of the Second Coalition. And even of the two, it doesn't quite cover absolutely everything that the length of the War of the Second Coalition. There's a little bit towards the end or the later half that is a bit truncated, but that's okay. I think what the design intent here is to capture the significant campaigns. There are, the way like the political and diplomatic situation of the War of the Second Coalition evolved would have been hard to articulate in the game's base rules, because it's just a little bit different than, say, how diplomacy and everything is handled from 1805 through 1814 for the rest of the Napoleonic era. So they had I think the designer just had to make some decisions about what gets portrayed and what doesn't. But the fact that there is still these scenarios for the War of the Second Coalition is significant. Again, no other Napoleonic game really does this to any significant degree. So this is the first of the two scenarios. It is the longer of the two, and this scenario runs the length of a year. So basically 4 seasonal turns. So it is much shorter than the War of the First Coalition scenario that we just played, but much longer than even the next scenario, which we'll eventually do, which is the Marengo campaign, which lasts only, I think, a single turn. Interestingly enough, I'll have to double check that, but I believe that to be the case. So this scenario runs from the spring of 1799 to through the winter of 1799 and the victory phase. So we have 4 solid turns to do the things that we need to do. And I have the map set up just so to the scenario setup with some cards distributed to the players in a rough uh, layout here on the map. Couple of things. So if we're gonna, if you know your history or you want to understand the situation a little bit better, here, we'll take a look at this. So at the end of the War of the First Coalition, um, basically, Austria had to leave the coalition. Austria was soundly defeated. You had the Campo Formio treaties and various things that basically put the French Republic in a decent position, with really only Britain maintaining the sort of offensive, uh, aggressive stance against France, while everyone else had pieced out in one form or another. In 1798, the year that's missing technically in this game, because the War of the First Coalition ends at the very end of 1797, this picks up in 1799. In 1798, you had sort of a consolidation of control. You have the sister republics being put into place across the French controlled territories here, which includes Holland, Flanders, Switzerland, it looks like some parts of Western Germany have French units in them, so they've not conquered them, but they do have French occupation underway. Um, it's a little weird because I'm trying to look at this minor powers chart, and like you look at 1798, and so if you were to look at like let's see, the Palatinate says that Palatinate is conquered by Baden in 1798 because it runs the whole way across this chart. And then if I look at Baden, it is an ally of Austria during 1798 still, not yet under control of France. And if we look at the map setup, um, the Palatinate is occupied by a French general and a corps which seems to imply that while, yes, this is ostensibly controlled by the Austrians with my little disc markers that I use that don't come with the game, they're just mine that I use to help keep track of who controls what. The French appear to be in control of that, so I don't know. I'd have to look very deep at the history to see that they like grab this and like on February, in February or something, and we're starting in March or April. I don't know, but there's a little bit of stuff there to look at. Same thing with like some French units in Tuscany, and even down here in the papacy and Romania, like these areas by the resource chart are to be controlled by Austria, or that's their political status, but it appears on the map that they are occupied by the French, which just means that if we, as minor powers, if we got to the end of the year, they would be conquered. Keeping in mind that we're really actually not going to see that in real game terms because the game will end at the end of the year. So a little bit of weird stuff, just reflecting the situation. The other significant thing that occurred in 1798 is that our good pal Napoleon Bonaparte went on a bit of a field trip. He took an expedition to Egypt. Now, I think there's a lot of cases where as a Napoleonic game, you can totally leave Egypt out of it because if you're just covering 1805, it is past its point of relevance in the overall Napoleonic story. However, this game does include it, part of the map that we haven't really looked at very much. And we have over here Napoleon himself with a number of corps in Cairo, Kleber in Alexandria, and then Desai, just kind of hanging out over here, um, which seems to imply that they're busy trying to keep Egypt occupied. Technically, this is controlled by, politically is controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and this is their first real appearance in the game proper. So I'm using these orange discs for them because I have green discs, but I'm using them to represent Russia. So technically controlled by Egypt, but currently occupied by France, and this is a territory that is a victory condition, which I'm using as I'm using this as a mnemonic. Uh, so right now, I should probably swap that out for a blue chit because the French technically control it at the moment, but politically it's supposed to be with the Ottomans. And then through here, we see there's a small number of Turkish Ottoman units here in Acre in Palestine, and then Syria. These fortresses in Syria do matter for victory conditions. There are a number of other Ottoman units that are set up in Constantinople and Adrianople. They're not huge. The units are okay. There's some Janissary units that are pretty strong. There's a couple of special rules where ordinarily in the Grand Campaign later, the Ottomans have access to Turkey. The game calls them Turkey. I'm calling them the Ottomans. You can split hairs there if you want. But Turkey has some feudal units that they can call up on a cadence. They do not have access to those units in this scenario. And then just looking briefly back to Europe for a second, the Russians are in. So this, being Suvorov's last campaign, the Russians make their first debut chronologically in the game, with a number of Russian forces coming over from way out in Russia, and we have Suvorov at Moravia right now as he begins to head west, continues to head west to where he needs to get. Now I'm going to have to double check some of the supply rules because ultimately the Russians are going to be reliant on the supply path provided to them by their ally in Austria. And I'm a little nervous that there's a couple of things that actually aren't up to snuff for their supply line, and I need to adjudicate that somehow, like deploying detachments or supply trains or something to make the supply work, or I'm going to have to double count. I'm not sure. I think there's something weird because there's just these very large gaps once you leave Krakow to get to like Lublin is more than 4 movement points, which means there's got to be a dropped supply train somewhere to make all of that work. I think I have to double check again. Otherwise, the theater of operations will be many of the same ones where we're going to have fighting in Germany, fighting in northern Italy, most significantly, and then that struggle in Egypt. And so, how all these things come together for the victory conditions are such that France wins if no fortress is coalition controlled in 1792 France, makes sense, Flanders, Holland, Switzerland, Piedmont, Genoa, or Egypt. So for France to win, they need to basically keep control of all the stuff they already have control of at the beginning of the scenario. And that's kind of it. They need to control those things. They need to retain control of Egypt. The coalition wins by capturing either Paris, Antwerp, or Lyon, uh, without losing a fortress in Syria or Palestine. Um, any other result is a draw. So you could certainly figure out a situation where maybe the Allies do well on offense. You know, if both sides do well on offense and the coalition is in some of the satellite states here, that might put the coalition in a winning condition, except if the French do well in Egypt somehow, then um, we would find that that it's a draw. So the coalition has to defend uh, Syria and Palestine. The French have to defend, the territories that they've gained in the last war. There is no production. There's no event phase during spring 1799, and so no declarations of war or diplomacy actions in this scenario. Um, so the political situation for the whole year is set, and there's no event phase, no drawing of new cards at the beginning of this scenario. Also, we immediately remove Bonaparte from the map if France has lost Milan, Mantua, and Rome. A French leader in command of an army can only be replaced by a 3 stars leader if one is available. Um, so that's sort of the whole overall situation. The political diplomatic situation of this particular part of the conflict is that with France kind of feeling its high over the war of the First Coalition and Napoleon taking expedition to Egypt, it was sort of seen as like, hey, things are getting kind of out of control, guys. So Turkey wants to fight the French, and isn't this a reason to get the gang back together again? Prussia sitting this one out, but Russia choosing to get involved and being allied with Austria, and Britain is happy for the support. The other thing is the British got to set up 2 fleets wherever they wanted, and they chose to put fleets in the Eastern Mediterranean. So as you can see, whether we're talking about the Gulf of Lion, Central Mediterranean, or the Eastern Mediterranean, there's a British blockade, uh, as there was historically, you could say, to Egypt, which puts the French units, I'm quite certain, out of supply, which is going to give them some pain dealing with the Turkish units. Because if the French were in full supply and you had Napoleon, you could imagine, yeah, you would just raffle stomp your way up the coast of Syria and Palestine. But because of the supply situation, Napoleon's going to be fighting that, and it's not like these Turkish troops are all awful. There's some pretty good Turkish troops that are available that could pose a problem for the French. So you could see where the historical situation where that expedition army just starts to attrit away, and the important areas in France that are the gateways to France itself. These satellite states that have been set up are under direct threat. Napoleon heads back. He abandons his army. So that is the situation. Now, what's weird is that the cards, it's kind of strange. There's um, there's a card or two in the deck that uh, must not ever get used. So there's the Santo Domingo card, where the French player has to remove steps to go deal with an uprising. And it's a 1798 card. It can be up through 1804. I don't think this card is used in the Marengo campaign, but uh, in the scenario setups, you have a very specific set of cards that are with each player. It's defined. We'll take a look at those cards in a second. Um, but because there's no event phase in spring, like I don't think, and because the scenario says it starts in the activation phase, and maybe that's the mistake. It shouldn't say it starts in the activation phase, but there's no way to draw more cards for this whole scenario. So what everybody has right now is all they're ever going to get, and cards like this don't seem to have any way to get into the game. Now this might be the only card that's actually like that, but like I said, it doesn't appear to have any real way to enter the game. So you'd have to use it with some house rules, or say, because I think in Bjorn's rules, as opposed to Banania's, Bjorn's rules include doing card drawing. So they change it. And that's a Bjorn decision, almost a house rule in his rewritten rules. But the rules as written, as reorganized by Banania, there's no way to get those cards. And this, I think, is another hit on the game in terms of the like something maybe in translation or just the intent didn't quite get ironed out enough, and there's these weird little wrinkles that maybe a couple of good passes by a really sharp developer with that can speak French and English fluently and can talk to the designer and really hammer out these things, would finish this game completely. But you got to live a little bit with the wrinkles here. So the French have just a couple of standard cards. They have Fear the Sound of Guns, which keeps a march to the sound of guns from happening, and Art of War, which provides bonuses to a leader, or avoid a casualty check. So decent utility cards. But the coalition gets some of these event cards that are specific to the scenario. So here, appropriately enough, Austria has the second coalition card. The Austrian and Russian players each immediately receive 2 infantry steps to reinforce already reduced in supply corps of their choice anywhere on the map. And it's a public event. They will have to play this, so they might as well go fight and lose some steps to make use of this. So that's a nice reinforcement card, given that the rest of the scenario will not have reinforcements very generally. And then the Russians have 2 cards. They have the Suvorov card, which can be played when they choose because it's not a public event. A coalition force commanded by the Russian leader Suvorov automatically passes morale or gets a +2 combat bonus. So just that's a nice thing for Suvorov to kick some butt. Maybe making it, it's like kind of deterministic, like, okay, guaranteed Suvorov is going to kick somebody's ass. And then Winter Campaign, which this is a base game utility card you play during initiative phase of a winter turn, and basically it makes it for a really long winter turn. Uh, probably appropriate that the Russians get this. I don't know, but basically it means that if the coalition is not winning, and another campaign in the winter could help them achieve victory, the very last turn of the game, they can make it an extended turn to keep trying for that victory. Now, I think what in terms of everything that happened in the War of the Second Coalition, Suvorov kicked some butt. Napoleon had to get involved. By the time Napoleon was coming back to fix the situation, this scenario was already kind of ending with Suvorov having to pull back and retreat. And I think Suvorov either retired or died maybe not too long after that. So Suvorov is a really great leader, and it was a well-known, good Russian army leader. But he and Napoleon never fought, as far as I'm aware. And I guess that's one of those what ifs of history of, oh, what if Suvorov and Napoleon actually opposed one another directly? How would that go? Who knows? But in this game, Suvorov is quite good, and he is going to be coming down to get involved here. So that's a really long intro, guys, which may mean that this video is either going to be very long or it's going to get split up a bit. But I wanted to kind of showcase the setup here because, again, you don't see a War of the Second Coalition scenario in much of any game of this time period, from any publisher. It is very hard to find such things, and sure enough, this game allows for it, supports it, and here we are. We've got our own little mini Napoleon and Egypt scenario alongside the rest of the Suvorovs uh, the European campaign with Suvorov, and the two do kind of connect, you know, together here. They're on the same map. There's, you know, maybe the French fleet can bust out of here and reestablish a supply line. I think that's unlikely, but it might be worth a shot. Um, so yeah, there you go. Now I will say the initiative starts with the French, which means the French player, the French side of my mind, will select an initiative chit from the available to pick, you know, who to go and what to do. And we'll certainly do that. I'll need to think on that, but here we are. We'll get started, and I'll show when we come back from the transition here. I will have probably played through the spring of 1799, and we'll talk about what all happened during it. Um, I may pop back in to show something important that occurs during the turn, but I suspect this will be an abbreviated format because you guys have seen, you know, plenty of the game already. If you've watched the rest of the series I've been doing on this game, so I don't want to show like every single little thing I'm doing. Maybe I'll show some of the stuff in Egypt in more detail, but I'm going to want to keep this to either one or two videos, um, given that it's a shorter campaign that is just around a whole year and not much more than that. So let me go start taking care of things, and we'll see what goes on with this campaign. Okay, so here we are after what turned out to be a long summer. I'm pretty sure yeah, the winter quarters chit was actually the last chit to come out. Now, I had pulled it twice, but not the third time. That would have been the sudden end of the turn. Um, so it just worked out to be that, you know, every chit got played. Um, and to kind of quickly talk about what's occurred, we'll zoom in a little bit to various areas. So first of all, the Russians left St. Petersburg and are hanging out in Britain, with one of the British armies moving up to form a group that will be able to uh, operate together. Actually, I'm trying to think. Maybe it's not going to work that way because they can't stack. Ugh, maybe I made a mistake, guys. Anyway, point is, I'm trying to get these guys kind of set up to be able to come do an invasion of Holland. That's a historical campaign that happened, but we'll see. Uh, Mounsey came over here to kind of play more zone defense, and then in the German theater, we'll zoom in a little bit more here, try to get a focus. So Charles here has tried to break into Strasbourg and just can't seem to get lucky enough to push it back. The modifiers for the battles have tended to come out even, and he just could not get out. And then Jourdan pursued him. He evaded away handily, and then the French knocked out the fortress at Baden and retreated back to Strasbourg. So the important thing is like there's nothing super critical in the German theater. The hope from the Austrian perspective was for Charles to make a breakthrough and then start operating in a way that they could come in to Flanders or Paris from the south and kind of stream Austrian reinforcements and leave the majority of Italy after a while to the Russians and kind of win that way. But that whole theater is shut down at this point. There's a possibility that with these reinforcements from Rosenberg and possibly von Hotz, though it's going to be who knows. He may be able to try again, but I think he's going to be more advantaged in trying to pull back and head to Zurich, to be honest. Because if we can take, as the coalition, Zurich from the French, that would cause them a problem. Now, other reinforcements and Austrian forces have been moving up to get into position. You see there's kind of a standoff here in the mountain passes. And then around Mantua, we'll shift the camera a little bit so you guys can see this a bit better. And I'll try to adjust the focus. There we go. So the French, while having a very reasonable defense, just could not withstand the Austrians here that came over from Venice. And in a series of combats where the French actually rolled pretty poorly consistently, the French kind of maneuvered around and got pushed back out. The force that was in Boulogne has actually had to come around and reinforce that army. And the Austrians are actually sitting happy here besieging and have done one step loss to the fortress, besieging Mantua. And so they're probably going to get it. And I think once they get it, it's going to be really hard to get knocked out of there. The challenge for the French is that because there's no production, this whole scenario, whatever front gets shut down for good. So here we just see the French kind of getting pushed out of Mantua, and it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to take it back. Even if they perform well against the remaining army of Italy for the Austrians, which I'll say is, let's see, 8 steps strong, which is pretty hardy at this point. Um, right behind them, besides these little reinforcement guys that could come in, we have a pretty big stack of Russians coming with Suvorov. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps, and he's a really good leader, a 503. So no matter kind of what happens to the Austrians here, the Russians are going to come down. It's taken them a while to get here, but they're going to kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5, 6 with an extended move, and they'll be outside Mantua as well. And the problem that the French have as well is that they've got no real reinforcements to move from somewhere else to support the Northern Italy theater. It's just going to go to hell in a handbag unless the French manage to crush the Austrians up here and then it can swing down south. But I really am not counting on any of that occurring. So Italy looks like it's in rough shape, and there are Russian reinforcements, small ones that are further up here. You can't quite see. I'm going to adjust the camera a little bit. I did have to drop a depot because, as best as I could tell, they needed it to get supply properly. These guys are kind of inching their way down too. So the Russians are going to be able to provide a lot of additional bodies, no matter if the Austrians fail. And so far, the Austrians are not failing. Now, in southern Italy, we did have a force moving. We dropped our depot in Rome and then have been moving to take Naples. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there's something goofy with. I think we've got a supply problem here. But either way, yeah, we probably do because I'm not. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that guy's there. So really, this depot should probably be here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then Rome is unoccupied, which could be its own problem. But anyway, there's a bunch of goofiness here, guys, that I'm screwing up. Sorry. Anyway, the point was that this force was trying to take Naples, but Ferdinand is putting up enough of a defense that we haven't seen anything really happen. So ideally, I guess the French would want to take this guy out, take Naples, try to come back north or hold down Rome. They're really just in a position that would definitely be beneficial to have, say, Napoleon Bonaparte here, but he's busy. Before I move over to Napoleon, I will show that there was some naval activities. The French fleet left Toulon, actually won a victory against the British fleet. The British lost a fleet unit. The other had to retreat to Gibraltar. These guys did have to go back to Toulon, and then since then, the British have maneuvered some British ships into the blockade box of Toulon, kind of forcing the French hand that if they want to come out to play, they're going to have to fight Admiral Nelson, which would not go well for them, I suspect. So there was a little bit of attempt to knock open a supply path to Egypt, but as it stands, supply is a very hard thing to manage in Egypt itself. So we'll zoom in for a second, kind of show what's going on. These red markers denote important fortresses for victory conditions. So Napoleon started by making a trip towards Acre in Palestine, and he actually lost. He lost a fight because these French are operating out of supply. They can't trace supply back home. They're in trouble. So while Napoleon it was kind of rough, even odds. He just can't make it
any further north being out of supply, even with all of his bonuses making up for it. The in supply Turkish units are just, it just comes out to be a wash, and the skirmish battle results have just wound up with no real clear victory. The problem then was that the Turkish forces came down via naval invasion into Alexandria, eliminated a force here, and are now operating and besieging Cairo. Their big problem being they're out of supply due to the way supply works. Now, you might ask, how are they out of supply? Well, the problem with the Turkish units here is that they don't have a depot, and Egypt is technically not part of national territory uh, of the Ottomans. At least I don't think. Let me double check that. I'm pretty sure that is the case. So Egypt is considered a Turkish ally. So because these aren't fortresses, the only fortress here is Cairo. The Turkish units, when they arrived here and fought the French at Alexandria, defeated them, if they moved away, or basically even once they were here, without a supply depot, they're out of supply because they can't trace back to Constantinople or any other friendly fortress based on the reading of the supply rolls. They don't have a supply link. They were in supply for the amphibious invasion, but that was it. So they are operating also out of supply while the French are out of supply and are besieging Desai at Cairo with a siege +1 so far. They didn't take it yet. So what you can kind of understand here is what's going to happen is in summer, the Turks are probably going to get control of Cairo, and then poor Napoleon here is going to be between a rock and a hard place. He's avoiding attrition for a number of modifier reasons, but he's not going to be able to operate very well, and these guys are just going to start to bleed away before too long. So and then of course at some juncture, as the French are losing in northern Italy, they will remove Napoleon Bonaparte from the map anyway as he rushes back to Paris to deal with political matters. So right now, while we're only a part way through the whole scenario, I would venture a guess that the coalition will win this scenario. But we'll have to see. What I don't see happening is a French outright victory because um, with the victory conditions being what they are, it would require, let's see, yeah, no coalition controlled fortress in Egypt. So as soon as the coalition gets control of Cairo, and they're not going to need to do much else at that point, it kind of locks the French out of a victory condition. So at best, the French are going to be able to try to get a draw, and I'll play it out. Right, we're not going to end the video here, but I would guess that at best the French are going to hope for a draw victory. They're going to need to keep the coalition from winning, which um, they haven't lost a fortress in Syria or Palestine, so the coalition will need to take either Antwerp, Lyon, or Paris at some point here over the next couple of turns. I don't know how likely any of that is, but it's more feasible than what the French are going to need to do to win. So I would guess that we'll see the scenario end in a draw or possibly a coalition victory, though I doubt even that can end up occurring. So, yeah, we'll see what happens here. I'll take care of the summer turn, which we'll see all of the chits played again. And again, we'll see the Russians come in and the French try to figure out what they can do to, I guess, keep the coalition from winning and fight for the draw. Okay, here we are. I'm going free cam with this one. We are at the end of summer, and I feel like we're deepening into the
draw for this whole scenario, but just to show, poor Napoleon's out here wasting away with one step left. He's got some baggage trains, but he's got one step left. He's boxed in. The Ottoman armies have taken Cairo again, and so he's just kind of doomed. The French did take Naples and have come back to Rome and are holding it, but only just so. The Austrian and the Russians have moved forward, eliminated the French army of Italy in what was kind of a close fight, but the French ended up rolling terribly, and the Austrians, or rather the Russians, Suvorov defeated an army without an army himself, and then the Austrians leapfrogged out of Mantua into Milan, which now puts Lombardy back in Austrian control, which furthers the French are not going to win this scenario. Now it's a real question of, are the coalition going to win? Or are we going to get a draw? There's really not much keeping the coalition forces from sweeping this way and getting potentially to Lyon, and that would be it. That would be a victory, I think. Um, in Zurich, the Austrians actually, for a moment, captured Zurich, but the French pushed back and pushed them back out of there. And then we've got reinforcements having moved east to join up with the Army of Germany. So the Army of Germany, formerly led by Jourdan, was getting a bit of a beatdown from the Austrians. But we managed to pull in Massena from the north and whatnot, and actually pushed Charles out of Strasbourg and recaptured it for the French. So that's kind of touch and go. It's almost, I mean, for all the steps that are fighting there, the only significant thing is it's keeping the Austrians from being able to push even harder. But what the French really need to do is knock out this army, swing down south, and try to disrupt what's going on in northern Italy. And I don't think they're going to have the movement to do it with the rest of the season, since we're going into fall and winter here before long. And the coalition may be even in a good place where they don't need to play the winter campaign card or don't want to. The Russians did try to navally invade Antwerp. That failed. And the British have tried to walk across the straits a number of times and just can't seem to defeat this holding force of militia and a detachment. They just can't seem to do it, rolling awfully for all of that. So it just seems like for all these critical battles that could really shift things, those keep failing, but the grinding of sheer attritional numbers in northern Italy is to the Russian and Austrian benefit, and they pretty much can fan out and take control of northern Italy to their whim. They can take Piedmont, they can take Genoa probably, and even continue to pressure Zurich. So it is sort of tough to figure out like what else can be done on the French side to keep this from being a coalition victory. It will at least be a draw, but we'll have to see how it plays out. So I think if I were playing this opposed, right, if the French players like I can't, there's no way for me to win. Why would I want to keep playing? I could see that being an issue. Like I think the victory conditions for this scenario are so tight that as soon as one becomes unfeasible, and to be honest, Egypt feels unfeasible just straight off the bat. Um, I think maybe the scenario is really good as a historical exercise, less of a game, just because I feel like the French are just not going to get to keep Egypt. I just don't see how they can do it. They're not going to win. At best, you hope for a draw. Maybe that's a moral victory. Or I think this set of victory conditions, if you and your opponent could agree to interpret a different situation as a French victory, or like a minor French victory, where a major French victory would be French control Egypt. Have it be a tiered victory rather than just a victory or a draw and whatnot. I think that might be better for a scenario like this because it is so short and things just happen so quickly here. But anyway, we're going to get into the fall turn. That might be shorter. The winter turn might be short too, for all we know. And the coalition have the advantage of having their winter campaign card. The French haven't found a good opportunity to use their cards yet, and the Austrians did play. So the Russians played Suvorov to help ensure that they were going to win that fight there, and they did. And then the Austrians played Second Coalition to restore some units in the Army of the Rhine. So The cards are kind of played out. So we're really kind of coming down to the final sets of mini campaigns of these armies, and we'll see where the chits lay. We'll come back and report back in at the end of the autumn turn. Okay, here we are after the autumn turn now. It ended up being a very, fairly short. We only got 5 chits out before the winter quarters chit came up twice, which probably hurt the coalition more than the French. So down in Egypt, another Turkish army has landed in Acre and will be reinforcing. So, I mean, the days of Napoleon in Egypt are numbered. He doesn't have a whole lot that he can do. I actually forgot to roll. Oh, wait, no. There's only one step in that force, so there's no way for them to attrit at this point. So he's running around with a bunch of horses, not making much headway. These guys are pretty much just kaput. There's nothing they can do. They either lose, they're going to lose Roma. If they leave it, there's not much that they can do. Um, and then in northern Italy, the Austrians have taken Piedmont, and Suvorov is starting to lead a trek into the Alps to come out near Lyon, and will probably take it because there's really not much for the French, not much the French can do to try to stop them, and they missed their opportunity to activate this militia to run up there. So it won't take much for the Austrians and the Russians to get in there potentially. So I see it as probably achievable. In the German theater, the French have actually pushed the Austrians back, and a number of evasions that eventually Charles stood at Munich and lost a battle, and he's actually hurting, but the French force is not much bigger. So it's kind of a tough thing. There's some reinforcements for both armies right here, just north of the Alpine passes. Um, but the coalition just needs to hold there. The British still can't get over the channel. Of course, they didn't have much opportunity. They had one chance before winter came up, and they couldn't do it. Everything else is pretty much stable. There's always this danger of, are we going to try to make another landing over here during a naval impulse? So these guys kind of have to stay here, but it just leaves, I think the reality of the situation is the French just don't have enough forces to hold, and I find it very unlikely that the French can actually win this scenario unless they get very lucky with Napoleon in Egypt attacking things out of supply, and then you would play some kind of like zone defense or something, or a very evasiony defense with the French army down here, because you'd have to get lucky and defeat both armies, and you just don't have good enough leaders down there to do it. Now, granted, a lot of this is historical, right? Napoleon gets stuck in Egypt. Everything else in Germany and Italy mostly Italy goes to crap, and he has to head home. So I guess, it's just in this particular case, it seems like the coalition may have enough oomph to actually win a victory and come out ahead of the historical situation, I think, because I did not get this far. But the thing is, the final turn of the scenario is a winter turn, which means we could see the turn end very fast, and maybe the Austrians and the Russians actually don't get an opportunity to get in there. But if they play their winter campaign card, then that increases the likelihood they get Lyon. If they don't, they might miss their opportunity. And then if they give the French more time, the French may be able to make something happen to disrupt the situation. But I don't think that's the case. So I do think I didn't think they were going to do it, but now I'm thinking, yeah, I think the coalition wants to play the winter campaign card and ensure victory, and that will make up for the fact that they lost the War of the First Coalition, I guess, in the previous playthrough. So let me go take care of the winter turn. We'll show the end result of that here in just a second. Okay, here we are at the end of the winter turn and the end of the scenario functionally. It is certainly a coalition victory in the final stages of things for Egypt. Turkish armies attacked at Cairo. Napoleon had ran over here and taken it and destroyed the fortress because he didn't have the strength to garrison it again. But in the process, pursuing Turkish units that were in supply, basically took him out. And he chose to stand here because there's no point in trying to, evade away because there's no point. So he tried to fight. He still lost due to rolling very poorly. In fact, I think every battle that Napoleon fought, he rolled very terribly. So this is sort of maybe the you know, cosmic karma here from the last game where the French enjoyed good luck. I think the French have enjoyed some bad luck. So Egypt is in coalition control, which means the French definitely don't win, period. And then in the northern theaters, while the French try to do some goofy things, if I could take that marker off, by like sitting on top of the Russian supply lines here um, with Massena, the Austrians were still in supply, and they still wound up coming over and taking Lyon, which is a victory condition. And basically, the French just got stuck trying to siege out Innsbruck, couldn't really do much there. The British did cross the channel, but didn't make a whole lot of it. So I think just based on the way that the victory conditions are written, I believe this to be a coalition victory. The coalition managed to penetrate into France proper and taking a significant city of importance while being in supply. Plenty of depots, allied depots, and whatnot that can be used to support the supply tracing. So at least I think that's how that works. Either way, they had successfully did what they needed to do to win, with some activations to spare. So if I got a couple of smidge things wrong, the coalition had enough activations to ensure the capture of all of these places. So um, yeah, there you go, guys. Coalition victory for the War of the Second Coalition. I think they've done a bit better than history. Very generally, I think this scenario is weighted against the French, but let me do a different segment of this video as a, same video post-mortem and just kind of talk very briefly about how things went. Okay, so let's talk post-mortem. I don't know that this will be super long, but we'll see. Generally, this was an interesting exercise, but one, again, I feel is very much in the like for historical analysis rather than a full-on game competition, because it feels like the coalition just has all the advantages, and maybe that's something to be said about the Egyptian expedition that Napoleon went on. That what are you trying to achieve, right? The British are going to the British are going to control the seas almost certainly. The French can't necessarily contest the British Navy, and you're going to go all the way across the Mediterranean, where I might add the British have basing in that they can project power into the Mediterranean. You're going to go all the way to Egypt, which doesn't have very good infrastructure for supply, and you're going to get cut off and screwed up, right? Like, and that's basically what happened even in this scenario, where no matter what I wanted to do with Napoleon, he was going to operate out of supply, and maybe he could have gotten into some of these forts. But the thing about it is, as best as I could tell, um, then what, right? Like, so suppose that you do that, you take various fortresses that might keep the coalition from winning, but you still got to hold Egypt. So out of everything on this side of the map, Egypt is more important, and very generally, you're just fighting without supply. Like, that's all you really have. And I don't know, maybe he shouldn't have head north. He should have just hung out here, and that's it. And then when the Turkish units came down here, he could have defeated them potentially. That's probably the weakness. Now, for a hot second there, he took Cairo back, but it wasn't going to last, and he just rolled badly. So I think no matter what, I think the Egyptian theater of the scenario, it is a challenge. It's meant to be. It's historically a bad situation for Napoleon that he put himself in, that he put that army in. And I would guess no matter how many times you play this scenario over, he's going to have a hard time. Maybe you get lucky and he defeats all of the Turkish forces that come south to fight, and he retains control. That's great. And if you can avoid the worst of attrition that would be ticking over the entire year, maybe you can hold it. But I don't know about that.
For the rest of the theater and the areas of fighting, it, it feels like the French are certainly outmatched, especially because they have nothing here as a backstop. Maybe at best you would have this force take out Naples and then be running back home or something along those lines. Um, but even that kind of relies a bit on luck. And so, if I think just sheer weight of power of Austrians and Russians coming down into the valley, the Po Valley, and everywhere else around Mantua, like I just don't see where the French can reasonably expect to win. Now, maybe they should have just holed up inside Mantua um, instead of fighting a field battle. That's one option that they maybe should have done, and I did not do. But the tough thing about fortresses are there's always the chance that you get honors of war, and in a scenario like this where you get honors of war, that force is just gone for the rest of the scenario because it's only a year long. So I, I think for the French to have held northern Italy, they would have had to have won successive combats and avoided losing many steps and demoralized armies to eliminate them. The funny thing is, out of this entire scenario, nobody became demoralized. We certainly had battles where it was feasible for the losing force to become demoralized, but they all succeeded on their die rolls, which is amusing. So there was no like one army totally wiped out. Wait, maybe there was one time that happened. Maybe that had to do with the French. I'm trying to remember now. I don't think they did though. I might be misremembering now. That could be a problem. Anyway, if demoralization happened, it happened but once and led to the destruction of the French army of Italy. But I think they were just eliminated outright from step losses. So, I mean, just generally, it was an attritional scenario, one where the coalition enjoy a very high number of advantages. In the Northern Theater, not a whole lot happened, but that could have maybe have gone worse for the French. It didn't really go too great for the coalition. They just couldn't turn something into a major victory. Maybe some of that was getting tunnel vision on the straits at Boulogne, and maybe the British should have done a naval invasion. The Russians trying a naval invasion was kind of humorous, and it didn't necessarily work, but that was also just due to kind of bad luck on die rolls. So with any war game, if one side has better luck and has better resources, they're going to win. I think that happened here. It was an interesting exercise again, and just what can you do with the forces on the map? Can you slow down the Russians? Can you slow down the Austrians? Is there a way to try to screw up their plans in very minimal ways? I think the French could, but I think if you and your buddies are like, hey, let's play Nations in Arms, I wouldn't play this scenario. It's attractive as a 1 year scenario on a part of the Napoleonic era that doesn't get much coverage either way. I think it's hard for the French player to come out of this one with anything resembling success. Again, you'd have to modify the victory level somehow and have a different interpretation. But as is, it feels really weighted against the French here. But I mean, that is also historical. So again, I mean, there's value here as a historical analysis. If Napoleon had not been gallivanting around in Egypt at all, and they just didn't even bother to do that, maybe Napoleon would have been facing off against Suvorov. Maybe it's a totally different situation. And I think the historical French were very fortunate in that at some juncture, Suvorov was recalled, and some other things had kind of gone on. So, interesting exercise, certainly an interesting little playthrough here. I did like that it didn't take long to play, right? You're just, I don't have to worry about production. I'm not worried about reinforcements. I'm not even really worried about new cards, what cards we get or what we have. And we're just going to play through and we're going to see what happens in this whole year as a campaign. And I do like that. I like the be able to cut around a certain time frame and say, we're just going to play this. Production takes a lot of time and thought, and it complicates things, obviously. Where here I could just play through, which was nice. And we're going to see an even more abbreviated version of all of this in the next video, which will be the Marengo campaign, which is a single spring turn, mind you, very short. And it might be more effort to set up the scenario than to play it, amusingly enough. So we're going to have to look at that and see about setting up Marengo. But I think this was interesting, and it gave me a little bit more of a preview of what the 1805 campaigns could be like, where there will be a lot more forces on the map. There will be multiple factions. The Russians kind of coming up from the rear, and being very dangerous, and all of that. I think we'll see that in the War of the Third Coalition and beyond, and we're just getting a little bit more inklings of some of the broader bits of the map. Right, the War of the First Coalition was really predominantly right over here all the time. We get to see Egypt a little bit in this scenario, and then Russia starts. The whole this part of the map actually matters. You have to look and see how are the Russians getting their supply. So I found that kind of interesting. Like, what is the supply path that is being used here? Um, so it's helping me think about, okay, well, when we get into the later scenarios, that is going to matter. Like, we're going to have to make sure we're counting through the right fortresses and movement points, and where are the right supply lines even at to proceed. That could be a major problem over time. Um, but yeah, so yeah, an interesting one, guys. I think we'll wrap it up here. Next one you'll see is the one turn Marengo campaign, which we'll have set up very shortly. That will probably be a very short video, but just to show that, hey, yeah, I am playing through as much as I can play through, and we'll see you in that next one. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Keep gaming.